every policy leads to the destruction of the black family and incentivizes people to not be successful. And then you keep you keep snowballing some of these policies.
Ed O'Keefe. It is very exciting to have you on with Adam and I today. I think you and I met in 2007 at a business group that we were both a part of. I think it was Yannick Silver's group. And I think we met in Vegas. Which
I was going to say, I'm surprised you even remember.
That's right. No, but no. So, man, I mean, again, excited to have Ed on. Since I've known Ed in 2007, I'm sure he's done a lot of things that I haven't had visibility into, but I've watched him build brands very successfally in the health nutritional space, and to a large degree, and where a lot of people, we're looking to build a company like Ed. Watched Ed coach and advise other entrepreneurs on how they were doing their marketing and showing them how to increase revenue. Again, something that he did extremely successfully. But I would say of all the things, and on top of that, he's amazing at curating very talented, very intelligent, very ethical people, and got to attend some of the events that he put on and got to meet some great folks through him. So he's kind of done it all. And amidst all of that, he has maintained a marriage with his lovely wife, and he has also raised and is still raising 7 kids. And that's, man, I'd say of all the things you've done, that's the thing that the business is impressive and the success you've had is impressive, but to do that and to still have a family that's thriving and well-adjusted, especially like in today with what's going on in our culture and how outgunned we are as parents. I don't know. That's the thing that's probably blowing me away the most. But I don't know is there anything else that you'd want to throw in there that I didn't?
Yeah, cover? I mean, first of all, thank you. I mean, I would just say, Coach. I mean, my true passion. If I wasn't, if I had unlimited time, effort, and energy, I'd be coaching more volleyball. I would probably do it every day. And then even like my son, just to give him a quick shout out, just finished 9th in state for golf. And that was, the reason I share that is not to brag about, I know nothing about golf. Actually, I've learned very, very rapidly to support him, but being his wingman along the last 4 years to go from 0 to competing. And I think that's probably one of the things I'm just most excited about, even with business and entrepreneurship, which we'll talk about now or in a little bit, is I love watching other people succeed and in coaching and raising kids and marriage. It's all you get everything. Like competition plus life is just such a mirror of you are in both contexts. It brings both out of you, right? Like your true self shows up when you are striving to do something great. And so so I would say that's the other one. If I'm going to be that old guy coaching volleyball with 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, and hopefully working with some Division I players like I am now. And just because it's something I'm still so passionate about and love watching those light bulbs go off. But anyhow, I could ramble about. But I believe that same way about any sport, honestly. It's just that's the one I'm actually good at teaching. So
Got it. No, I think would love to crack that one open more. So one thing we like to start out and ask everybody on the podcast before we really kind of dive into everything is, again, the name of the podcast is Patriot on Purpose. Like for you, Ed, like what is your definition of a patriot this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, again, like, thanks for having me on. I think if we just kept it super simple, like, it's the thing that comes to my mind is the movie with Mel Gibson, The Patriot, and just the basic concept of, here's a man who is fighting for his family, fighting for his freedom, fighting for I want to be a farmer. I want to sit here and plant my seeds and take care of my crops and raise my kids and keep them safe, right? And so I live in Chicago, South Side of Chicago. Violence and crime has been through the roof the last 3 years. It doesn't seem to be slowing down. The overreach of the government has been obvious, and dealing with a sick child for about 2.5 years, and just watching the complacency, ignorance, and just cluelessness of so-called medical doctors and professionals that just stonewalled our ability. It's so funny, like the virus is supposed to be coming back now, and I'm like so thankful we have a certain drug I can't even name on a podcast because you might get banned, that we stocked up on. And why? Because all the integrative medicine doctors said this is the protocol that works. Anyhow, so without making this political thing, because I didn't really mean to, but I guess you can't mention the word patriot without
Right.
bringing up like, family, faith, your faith. Like, it's okay to say, like, I'm a Christian and be proud of that. It's okay to say the word Jesus, and I'm proud of that. And it's okay to say I pray, and I believe there's something much more greater going on. And I would love to come back to that topic when you guys are ready.
Absolutely.
And then just you're seeing how low. I think Joe Rogan even said it perfectly of him moving from California to Texas. One of his comments was, it's just amazing how local government controls your experience in so much ways. So we're kind of dealing with that. I'm praying a lot about that right now where we're currently at. So I don't want to go too much.
Well, it's
I'm happy to
okay
talk about
because
anything, but
I live a
Sure.
I don't want to go. I don't want to go like I don't want to be negative in it. So it's just
well, I'll be positive. I'm right across the
one of
river
the-
from you. I'm in Iowa, right, actually in the Quad Cities, so about 2 hours and 20 minutes from you. So just come over
Yeah,
here. Illinois
yeah,
is
yeah.
who needs it?
Well, Adam, I went to school at
Okay.
Marycrest University.
I have no idea.
Do you
I've
even
heard of
where
it. I
that's
know
at?
it's somewhere around here.
Okay. Well, it's closed down now, but it's
Oh, okay.
right by St. Ambrose. So I went to school at and then I coached here at Ambrose, and I still have good friends in the Quad Cities, and they're just like, dude, what are you
I know.
doing in Illinois?
All my friends are like, they know exactly what I'm going to say when the word Illinois comes up. I'm like, ugh, that's so gross. And I was just taught as soon as I moved here 4.5 years ago to not like the other side of the river. I'm just like, yeah, that's easy. It's like, you can just crap on California for being wackadoodle, and then you can do the same thing with Illinois because it's baby brother for all intents and purposes and all things communist and socialist experimentation. And there we are, politics. How'd we get there?
Yeah. Well, I would say this, like one of the positives are like the Midwest is filled with great people. I mean, there's almost some of the nicest people you ever meet are found through the Midwest, and most friendly people. I'll digress a little bit. Like when you look at, and I have opportunities coming into my life right now purely based on what I'm about to share with you guys. Like I grew up, I'm the 12th of 13 kids, predominantly blue collar family. My dad was an electrician for 40 something years. Like we grew up right here on the south side of Chicago, Beverly and Mount Greenwood, in our surrounding little areas, in my opinion, are probably the best neighborhoods in the country, right? As far as people looking out for each other and just the quality and character of the people. And so with all of that said, like this is why we're still here. And with all that said, it's just amazing how, and if like I haven't done enough on this to like go too far in depth, but I also am not ignorant to it, is that if you have state's attorneys that are backed by the George Soros funding machine that are failing to prosecute criminals, and we let them back out on the street within a day, they're carjacking and the violence. Like there's so much violence here that you literally could probably stop it within 30 days simply by prosecuting and keeping people in jail. And what I always find crazy, since we're talking on a Patriot podcast, is that there's a great book written by, it wasn't, what's the guy's name? Thomas African-American dude. Super bright. Yeah, Thomas Sowell. It wasn't written by him. It was written by one of his understudies. And he says, like, how white liberals are ruining black communities. And my neighbor gave me the book. And I was just blown away by how in a very short amount of time, here's this black man writing this book about how white people who are in the name of politics, claiming to be looking out for our best interest, But every policy leads to the destruction of the black family and incentivizes people to not be successful. And then you keep snowballing some of these policies. And there's another book that came out which was quoted by people way smarter than myself about the habit forming, like how the habits of entitlement is of being given charity occurs, right? The first time they appreciate it, second time it's like less appreciated, but by the fourth time it's expected. And so how do I transform a city, and by removing law and order completely in already under economically developed communities, but now there's lawlessness is just out of control, and then the institutions that have enough money to lose money for years, like Target, like Walgreens, like Home Depot, like Sam's Club, they all leave those areas where the crime is its worst. Why? Because theft is its worst. Well, you can't prosecute it. No. So do you see the cycle that's occurred? And who created the cycle? It's not the middle and it's not the right. So you can argue all day long on this, but unless Chicago decides to switch the policies, they're going to continue to lose its tax base because people are going to keep fleeing. I was at a community meeting just 2 weeks ago, and I asked the commander in charge, like directly, in a very polite way, because he's a great guy, he's doing the best he can. But his hands are tied on so many things. Like they're losing police at such an alarming rate. And I just don't see how anyone with the most basic IQ cannot see the statistical, like where this is taking us, right? So then you got to ask, like Adam and Nate, you're like, okay, well, if anybody with like a 6th grade education who's in government, so they're not stupid people, can see that when we strip the cops of all their capabilities to actually do their job, and if we don't prosecute anybody who does carjackings or theft or hurts people or whatever it might be, and I think 80% of the violent crimes on the street are from repeat felony offenders. Think about that, right? And so if that's then what is going on that we just don't know about? Like, is there like a backdoor, hey guys, this is what we're really doing. We're trying to like completely bankrupt Chicago so it becomes a federally funded city, and then we get to run things the way we want to, and we're going to be in charge for the next 200 years. Is that really what's going on? I mean, without being conspiracy theory?
Well, I think it's kind of funny that you say conspiracy theory, because there you were 3 minutes ago saying, hey, there's this drug that I stockpiled on that I can't talk about because it's going to get your podcast shut down, and it's ivermectin.
I know.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny? And it's free. Yeah, it's free.
I mean,
it's like
my dad's an integrated
cents.
physician, and they were recommending that protocol. And I'll be happy to say all day long that ivermectin is safe, effective, especially for COVID. And I know that these are problems, but the idea that there's this conspiracy or this grand narrative that people are always pointing at, and like, there's the tinfoil hat wearing people, they're wrong. And yet over the past 3 years, it's like, they're actually just telling the truth. And in 6 months, we're going to be proven to be right. We as a collective. And so honestly do believe that there is a targeted effort for, especially the underlings, the people that you had mentioned, like that are at the community level. It's not so much that they are in on it. They're just doing what they're being told to do, especially as it comes down from the top. So if there's like, I don't even know how the Chicago municipal system works, but like in smaller communities, I'm sure they're taking orders from, well, it was Lori Lightfoot, the mayor there, and then the new one. It's just this trickle-down effect. And they're just like, well, this is just like what we're supposed to do. Like, they're not even thinking for themselves, which is why when you are asking the question, well, anybody with a 6th grade education should be able to see. Yeah, they should, but they're not even opening up their mind to the possibility that something nefarious, loosely nefarious, is happening. They're just like, this is my job. I'm just going to show up. I'm going to do it. And that's what's causing, this kind of mentality is why the word patriot is even a polarizing word now. Like the fact that if you say, I'm a patriot, and some percentage of the country is like, oh, fascist. So you didn't think yourself to that conclusion. You just heard that parroted from whatever news channel, and now that's what you believe. And I think it's a lack of critical thinking overall that's gotten us to this place.
Nate, did you want to add to that? I couldn't disagree.
Yeah,
I think also too, people are in self-preservation mode, right? So if I'm working my way through the ranks of whether it's politics or whatever it might be, and that's what I know, and now I have the ability to be appointed in the machine, because like Chicago, They talk a lot about the machine, like there's powers that be that appoint you as say like Nate's not going to be the next mayor or the next state's attorney or the next XYZ unless I appoint him. And so who's the I, right? And there's certain names, Preckwinkle is one of the big ones in Chicago. And there were people before that person, in other words, that are pulling strings. Well, then, I guess if we wanted to go deep on this, we'd want to, follow the money. And I know there's bigger things. I mean, like Patrick Bet David did a big thing on this with George Soros. So people who are a lot more research than me can probably cite all that stuff. So, but that's where I would go. And I would also encourage people, man, like if you haven't read anything or listened to anything from Thomas Sowell, like go listen to the guy. The guy's probably one of the smartest. He was a guy who, I think he went to UIC or got his master's degree in economics, and this is kind of where some of my opinions on the policies that actually are doing more harm to the communities that these people are getting elected to be put into office for. But anyhow, he talked about how I think Milton Friedman was a really famous economist, and he was in Thomas Sowell was in his Milton Friedman was the professor. And Thomas Sowell at the time was a sworn Marxist and socialist, and he wanted to do his thesis on this, right, on the Marxist philosophies and why they're better for society than capitalism. And so Milton Friedman, if I read this correctly, if I remember correctly, had said to him like, okay, cool, go do that, prove out all your theories. And the more research he did on his theories that he had read about socialism and Marxism, he kept coming to the conclusion that none of these policies work for people. And then that's where he's probably one of the most published authors on economics, racism, the black communities, and just every polarizing topic. He's done so much research on. Yet, if you mention to anybody who says Black Lives Matter, you say, "Well, do you know who Thomas Sowell is? Do you know any of these?" They're like, "I don't even know who you're talking about," right? Which kind of is amazing to me. There was actually a guy debating with Candace Owens and Colin Noir, and he was the head of the BLM New York chapter. So he was the head of the New York Black Lives Matter, and they kept arguing. They were arguing back and forth, right? So. Hey, listen, we live in America, right? Part of patriotism is you're allowed to disagree and argue and have open debate. At least you're supposed to. And he was like, why do you guys keep quoting this guy, Thomas whatever? Like, I don't really care about this Thomas whatever, And they're like, they both look at each other like, you don't know who Thomas Sowell is? And you're sitting here like as a leader within, the entire New York city, BLM community. And I had a mentor years ago just talk about like there's a difference between like ignorance is you just don't know what you don't know, or you just don't know something. And so what I'm just amazed by, and I think this is a problem we're facing in our society, I don't have a great solution of it other than quadrupling down what we believe in our household and impacting from our four walls out. Like that's the focal point. And then having very, very strong faith. I want to talk a little bit about spiritual warfare in a little bit, because I really think that's what it's all coming down to. I think you're seeing men our age get closer to Christ and or get to be more curious because they know what the hell's going on in this world doesn't make sense unless there's a bigger thing going on. But where I was going with the solutions is that the people out on the streets protesting and doing ridiculously stupid things. I just think so many of them are ignorant. I do believe there's a good chunk that really believe whatever causes they're marching for, whether it's what's going on in the streets right now. But the cluelessness of people that are going out there using it as a cause to virtue signal is unbelievable to me. And do you guys also notice, I don't know the statistics on it, but do you notice how like over the last 3 to 4 years, we've gone through like different waves since COVID started, right? Since the BLM riots, which I have strong opinions about this. I mean, there was more Black lives lost in Chicago during the riots, like from good people, like trying to protect their stores, from cops, from sergeants, like standing out in front of their stores, defending it. Like, so I have strong opinions about that. But, and then you went through all the transgender movement, the alphabet movement, which, as you know, like, watch now, that fad's kind of like all of a sudden no one's really talking about it. Why? Because it flared up. People fought about it for 18 months. And now there's the Free Palestine movement going on. And then, it's like, so I've kind of opted out of really, like, I'll tap back in. There's certain podcasts I follow, but I think I'll tell you where my shift's gone mentally and spiritually, and it's been life changing for
you
my
had said something
household.
earlier, well, just like a minute ago, where what you are going to quadruple down inside of your home is all that you can do. And Nate and I just had a discussion around that. We've had like 2 or 3 just on our own where we're like, the most impactful that you can possibly be is loving the people in your family. And I believe that that's what Christ calls us to do. Like, he calls us to love our wives as Christ loved the church, which means sacrificially laying our lives down for our wives. And also, like, if your wife has brought children into your home, then the thing that you're supposed to do is lead them in godliness, and godliness is going to create a community, like this little microcosm of a family that's a community, and then going outward into the broader community, and just like your neighborhood. And you talked about staying in Chicago because the neighborhood is highly desirable, right? Like, obviously living in that city, not desirable. Your neighborhood, definitely desirable. Yeah. So if you can just
totally.
push it
Correct.
out, form a church, all that.
Well, yeah. Yeah, so I think, again, like, you're using the word church, which it's funny, I'm glad you brought that up, because I grew up Catholic, right? And so Catholicism and most religions are based around like the church being the religion. Like, there's a mixture of that, where in the Bible, and I'm new to this, Adam, right? So I'll tell you that, like, what, as far as reading the Bible, Catholics aren't really taught to study the Bible. Like, you go to church, the priest reads Bible things, people go up there, they read one chapter, we say the same stuff every time. And I think it really is powerful for a lot of people. So, like, my mom, who's passed away, my dad, that generation, like, that was their ritual. And so the other positive, and I didn't look at it this way, I want to come full back circle to that question, is that, because I just want to hit on this, because it really reframed my thinking about not criticizing your parents for raising you in a Catholic church if now you're an adult who doesn't really practice Catholicism. It's very cool to, like, make fun of where you came from that you no longer are part of, but you found a better way, right? So there's a pastor on something I was watching, and he said, listen, even if you didn't find Christ till you were 35, 45, 65, and you were raised Christian or you were raised Catholic, do you realize that your parents, whether you know it or not, generationally planted seeds that maybe they're just coming up now, they're harvesting now? And I was like, wow. So I kind of decided to opt out making fun of the Catholic Church. Now, there's tons of things I disagree with, by the way. But here's what I want to share with that. The other thing is, going back full circle to this, guys, is like the church, as far as I understand it, is actually, Jesus wasn't talking about like the Catholic Church or the Presbyterian Church or whatever it might be. He wasn't talking about the actual structure. He was talking about the people, about this is my church.
The body.
Yeah. Like, so that's what, when we go build our church, we're talking about building, like brothers and sisters. Yes. And so, and again, like, and so I didn't know that. Like, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool stuff. I didn't really realize that. Right. So, and it's cool. And then the other thing I didn't really realize too, which I think something everybody can do, and I didn't realize that this was actually even more important for men as the head of the household is that you have authority to pray over your wife and your children on a daily basis for protection, for guidance, for wisdom, and whatever else you want to protect or pray for, but you have that authority. So that's one thing we can all do immediately today. And even if you don't know how to pray, because I'm a guy who's like, I'm learning now. Like, I feel like I'm in my infancy. But it's just like, hey, Jesus, I need your help. Can you help me with these basic things? Because I don't really know what to say, but I know you know what to say, and you know how to deliver, and I'm here for you. I'm here to play ball, and that's a pretty damn good start. So
yeah, there's something. Oh, go for it, Nate. I've been hogging the mic.
No, you're good. I mean, there's so many directions like we could go right now. So I kind of want to tie this into something you talked about earlier, and maybe these things are one of them was as a catalyst for the other, but so clearly you're on a very not new spiritual journey, but like a very specific area of focus now. And earlier you mentioned that it's very clear to you that there is a spiritual battle going on
100%.
right now. So
without question.
Like, what are the things that you're seeing that, like, now you're like, all right, this is what confirms it. There's absolutely like spiritual warfare going on. There's good. There's good. There's evil. There's light. There's dark.
Remind me to come. I would say, first of all, if your listeners have not, I just watched this last night. I listened to the Sean Ryan show.
Oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of it
Victor
right
Marx.
now.
Have you guys?
It's brutal.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So at the end of it, I'm not going to get at the end of it. This is what happens. Like what's really funny is I was talking to my wife, and for your listeners, he was sexually abused and horribly abused as a child. It's like, you got to go listen to the guy's story, and then at the end of it, he talks about him going into the most violent, vile places in the world to either rescue children, rescue Christians, rescue people of any, by the way, religion. He said, I'll rescue.
He does not
any
discriminate.
Kids. He does not discriminate. But but he talks. Then he just goes into like dealing with demons and how he's seen it, and it's just so good. So I'm not going to give away stuff. But like, my wife didn't want to hear about the sexual assault part, and I'm like, babe, like number one is it's real, and like if people want to. It's one of the issues in our society. We could talk about like the good works of like what Operation Underground, like the book, all the stuff that came out. If you don't, but it's like I want to go backwards before I go into this, but I just want to tell your listeners, like, then I watched Free Burma last night, and the Free Burma Rangers, which Victor Marx recommended. I'm forgetting the dude's name. I think it's Dave something. But here's the thing. These guys are going into like the most violent places as warriors, but also missionaries. And when you listen to them, like you could listen to Ed O'Keefe talk about my experience or my beliefs about why this is spiritual warfare. But man, oh man, you go listen to those guys, and I don't know how you cannot believe. Okay, so I'm going to take a 30-second back tour. About 5 years ago, my good friends Jeff Usner and Vinny Fisher invited me to go out to a retreat in Colorado. It was the Wild at Heart retreat.
Eldridge.
John Eldridge. I pray with John every morning. He's got a great daily prayer on his app. He has this thing. Now, I was really nervous. I was kind of like, I am going to be the purple elephant in the room, because I am not that good of a Christian. Like, I'm just like, I don't like my buddy Jeff can pray for 6 hours straight, and he knows the Bible like almost by heart, and he's such a good leader of it. And I felt inadequate, which I would like to say to everybody, you got to get rid of that immediately, because that's, like what I learned this summer was, Jesus doesn't love you because you're good. He loves you because because of his grace and mercy. You being good, how we judge ourselves, is not really relevant to the equation to receive the Holy Spirit and do that. So I just want to say that. Number two is, I went to the retreat. It was really good. Now, number one is, I loved the book Wild at Heart and being introduced to that, because it finally introduced me to a Jesus I could buy into, which was that this guy was sent in the middle of a war, in the middle of a battle, and his life is actually a beautiful tale of an adventure and a battle, right? He came to save souls. And like like you talk about spiritual warfare, he was the king of doing and winning and conquering spiritual warfare. And what I didn't realize till I started watching the book, watching the movie, The Chosen, was that so many of the miracles that Jesus was able to do, he then anointed onto his disciples, and they were able to go do it. And I was like, Jeff, this is really going on, man. Like this, I didn't know this stuff. Like Catholic school, they don't teach you this stuff, man. Like I only thought Jesus like healed a few people. Like, but in the book here, it says he went down to the river and he healed people all day long, and everyone who came in contact, he healed. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then his disciples would go places and they were able to do it. I was like, holy crap, this is actually pretty exciting. But that was like the beginning. The seeds were starting to get planted. And then this summer, I'll just kind of go through this, because this summer, so my daughter, the last 2.5, close to 3 years, was one of the first people to get COVID. It ignited Lyme disease in her body. I'm going to give you guys like the 30-second version. But it was like having a child who had a hangover and mono 24/7. And they were, it just never went away. And then we had moments where like medicine was working, and then like things weren't working. And I can go more in depth on this, and in a different time I will. We got to organize her story because it was a ridiculously long journey. But I'll tell you, like, gosh, I can go. This is there's nothing worse in life than having a sick child. Period. End of discussion. Like, just totally broke my heart, stole my heart. For a long period, I really had a dark place in my heart. So much of my spirit was crushed, and I think like that's where, when people ask me like, well, hey dude, what's going on with you and like this new Jesus thing you got going on? I'm like, listen, brother, I tried doing this all on my own. Like, we tried everything. And my cars, my house, I'd give it all away. And I had that conversation with God. I was like, look, you can take it. Like, you can take it all. Just give me a healthy daughter, right? And it was about 2.5 years of that, with glimpses of it. And on the outside, I don't know if people would have noticed. I think like my oldest daughter probably was more aware of some of that than anything, because she saw me at different moments. And then my wingman, my little Keegan, who was sick, we were going to the clinic every week getting IVs. And like, Nate, you've been down this road where like, you're just that the NAD plus, the IVs, the vitamin B12 shots, the hope that works. Like, some of that symptomatically is some of the only stuff that really worked. We flew to Mexico. We spent down there with Ed Clay and Scotty Nelson at CPI Institute. And but that's when COVID was the beginning, so we didn't even know what was going on. They were just generous and kind enough to let us go down there. So anyway, long story short, coming full circle, and I can talk about whatever. But my buddy Jeff says, hey, Jeff Usner out of Pennsylvania says, Brother Harry Gomes, who's his spiritual mentor and father from India, is going to be in Pennsylvania for a healing service. It'd be great if you could bring Keegan and come out. I'm like, we're going, we're in. And so it was going to be the whole family. Next thing you know, it's me, Keegan, and Julia, my 12-year-old, driving out to, 10, 11 hours to Pennsylvania. And I remember so many times my daughter was still dealing with daily migraines, daily like body aches and fatigue, and she was better than she was 2.5 years ago, but it was like, come on, man, we can't excel. Like, this is just freaking, this kid can't just live with this the rest of her life. And I just remember driving out there and I was like, God, man, you better flip and show up because we are putting our faith in this, and I think we got there, met Brother Harry. He did the prayer service. He prayed over Keegan, and just tears started coming down her eyes. She said her whole body went numb. And then she said, I felt, so the issue is like with Lyme disease, there's certain types, is that it burrows in the brain. Like there's certain co-infections that burrow in the brain, which makes it so hard to kill. And she said, I felt things moving in my head, Dad. Like I felt them moving around. And so that night goes by. Next morning, I'm afraid to ask her how she's doing. Jeff comes over. He goes, hey, Brother Harry wants to pray over Keegan again. I'm like, all right, cool. Well, and they had 2 more sessions of prayer services, but we were invited to go to Jeff's house. Brother Harry sleeps like 4 hours a night. His phone's ringing the entire time. It's from people all over the world asking for his prayers. He just travels the world and runs these services. It's unbelievable. And prays over Keegan again. And it was unbelievable. But, so we go through the next day and a half. We're kind of there. And like Jeff grabbed her aside. And I remember he said one thing to her too. He's like, there's spiritual healing. Healing's not always just physical, but it's also spiritual, And so you're going to, like, he said something to the effect of like, you're going to be being told that you're not healed. And he's like, that's not from God. Like you have to fight that off. You got to bring Jesus over yourself. And that was my job as a father, by the way, as well, because I have that power, right, to do that. And then we come home, and I swear to you guys, the migraines are gone. The body aches, gone. The daily, like Keegan would tell you right now, I'm healed. I was joking with her this weekend. I was like, man, you are so annoying. You are so annoying. Because the sisters were like teasing Dad. I'm like, where did you guys get so annoying? And it just kind of hit me. I'm like, well, because she hasn't been this way for 2.5 years. And so when I left that church and like I was coming home, I was like, I just saw the finger of God touch my daughter, and I saw that she's healed. Like, you cannot tell me. There's a great song on YouTube. It's a video. I forget the dude's name, Brandon something. It's like Too Good to Not Believe. And he talks about, like, I've seen the healings. I saw the healing. Like, you can't tell me about it. It's not in a book. It's not in a movie. It was in my household right in front of me. And I was the scared dad who drove my daughter to that place and who'd cried dozens and dozens and dozens of times and whose heart was broken, and I saw it. And so now when I see, like, when I watch the show The Chosen, and how many times people were in such desperate moments, and it wasn't always the person who was ill. It was the father. It was the friend who, like, opened the roof and dropped down the person. It was the dad who, like, went running through the crowd and was like, Jesus, you got to come to my house right now, because my daughter, I know if you show up, she will be healed. And everyone's like, oh, don't just leave Jesus, leave this guy alone. Da, 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 da. And then, but the father knew, right? And then the woman who was bleeding and the people didn't, because she was ill and she was infected and she was tarnished. Like, don't just leave that guy alone. He's a prophet, like, leave him alone. Like, you're not royalty. And she ran through the crowd. And like, if you watch in the show, there's so much desperation. And I was like, I felt that desperation. Like, I got that. Like, and I think, I think that was part of my, like, I think, like, when people, like, bringing it back to me, because it's always got to be about me now, right? No, but, like, I was wondering, like, for so long, like, well, anyway, that was that story. And that just catapulted me on this journey of, I don't know if it's a new journey, but I think it's like you threw fuel on a fire that has probably always been there, right? Like they said, like Matthew 3:11, right? John the Baptist says, I could baptize you with water, but the one who comes after me, I can't carry his sandals or something like that. But he's the one who will baptize you with fire and spirit. And I started thinking about that. I was like, well, holy cow. And then I started learning about the Holy Spirit. And then I started, like, I asked Jeff, I'm like, well, how do I get to, like, what's the altar? He said, you're the altar. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, what am I supposed to, how do I become the altar? And how do I hear God more? And he's like, well, do the daily prayer, right? That's number one. Let's just get you started. So I started doing John Eldredge's daily prayer. And then I started watching all of Jeff's, which they're on YouTube. On Living Hope Church is one of his churches. There's like a million of them, by the way. So I'll have to send you guys a link of his actual thing. And then I started studying, like, well, okay, well, Jeff's so biblically sound that Jeff's teaching all this stuff with the Bible. And if the Bible's truth, well, then let me learn this stuff a little bit. Let me figure it out. And then I just, I start seeing these examples of people with faith who just are living in the Spirit way more, with way more faith. Now, what does that mean? Like, I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, oh, you're just a good Christian and you smile and it's like, no, how do we, and like the question I'm trying to live by is like, how do I just keep giving it over, all of it over? And I'm so not good at this. I'm learning this. And I'm just watching the miracles happen on a daily basis. Small ones, big ones, seeing them left and right. I think of somebody and all of a sudden, like, my phone rings, or I'm, who can I pray for? And my phone rings. And it's one of my best friends called me the other day, and he's never asked me for prayer in his whole life. We've never even talked about prayer. And I'm listening to Victor Marx talk about evil and how you need to have, you need to know how to learn how to pray for your angels, or to come forth and do battle for you in Jesus. And literally my phone fucking rings, and it's a friend of mine out of the blue calls me. And I was like, hey, what's up? Is everything all right? He's like, yeah, it's fine. I just had a quick question. Asked me a business question. Didn't make any sense. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Then he's like, man, literally what he says, I think my XYZ, he's talking about his business. So I is under attack. Like, spiritually. We've never had this conversation in my entire life together. And I'm watching Victor Marx talk to Sean Ryan's show about the spiritual warfare that's going on. And my phone rings from my best friend, one of my best friends, asking me to pray for him because he's under spiritual warfare. And he's never even been introduced to this before. Like, you can't not tell me that there's, like, once you start walking in this path and observing it, that this is not going on. Like, period. End of discussion. Yeah. I'm sold, right? Yeah. So, anyhow, I could probably talk all day on this stuff because I got more stories, man. I had so many, like, I remember, like, you guys, Jim Caviezel played.
He played Jesus and Tim Ballard.
He played Jesus. And he was just playing Tim Ballard. Right. But he was talking about when he played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. And I could totally butcher this story just for all your listeners. Know that this is not, you could fact check me all you want. It's probably 90% accurate. But he talked about how, if you look at it, his interview when he was talking about being Jesus, and one of his prayers was, Jesus, I don't want them to see me when I'm on the cross. I want them to see you. And he heard Jesus' voice say to him, you can't handle this. Like, it'll kill you. And he said, come on, please, just take over my body. But during that I think the cross scene was like 45 days. During that time, he got double pneumonia. The anchor that held the cross for the movie fell, broke his collarbone. What else happened? There was
didn't he get struck by lightning at one point?
He got struck by lightning twice.
Yeah.
He's had to have 3 open heart surgeries, right? There were people who did his makeup were agnostic or atheist, one or the other, something like that. Were what's it called? What's it called when people become Christians and they're atheists and then become. They were converted, not because of anything he said, but because they were just in the present. And there was somebody who was healed on set. All these things, right? And I was watching a video of him saying how just even with the Tim Ballard stuff, how he's like, I just don't care what Hollywood thinks. I just don't care. All I care about is how do I serve God in a way that he would want me to. And I just remember feeling like such a failure personally. Because I was like, God, how do I have faith like this guy? Like, come on. So a little time goes by, and I'm driving home one night, and a friend of mine who I know is in the neighborhood, who's a devout Catholic, and she's amazing. And I never drive this way, and she's outside on her front porch. And so I pull over. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And she knew Keegan was sick. She'd been dealing with stuff with one of her kids. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, I got to tell you a story. Like, da-da-da-da. And I start telling her. And I was telling her, I'm like, Treese, like, I got to tell you, this guy, Jim Caviezel, like, he's got faith. And I just asked God, like, God, how can I have faith like him? And I swear to you guys, a voice came over me. I've never heard it before in my life. And it said, what do you think I've been doing with you for the last 2.5 years?
Jeez, man.
And I was like, I got it. So, me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and we will figure it out. And that's where we're going to put our faith. So
I can kind of zoom us back to the beginning of this conversation and talk about spiritual warfare, because it's interesting. Like, when we decided to call this podcast Patriot on Purpose, I actually looked at the word patriot and where it comes from, the etymology. So it comes from patriarch, and then the Latin for that I don't remember exactly, but patriarch meaning father, right? So if you go through the Bible, you hear God, or Jesus specifically, referring to him as the Father. But when God talks about himself in the Old Testament, he talks about himself being the Lord of hosts, and that he is the God of all gods. So capital G, lowercase g. And if you start going through this is something that Nate and I have been exploring on an awesome podcast called Blurry Creatures. So anybody who's listening now, check out Blurry Creatures. It is awesome. Start with episode 57. You'll have your mind blown. But anyways, lowercase gods are they are other entities, and they are not of this world. So when we think about spiritual warfare, it's actually like this spirit realm. That's how we tend to think of it. And then, of course, like, you can get into Genesis 6 specifically, where it talks about how the sons of God came down and laid with the daughters of man, created this race called the Nephilim. This is right there before the flood. And then the Nephilim are wiped out. Their spirits are dispossessed and are left to wander the world. So, like, here we are 4,000 years after that, and these same spirits are alive and well, and they are at war with God. And my own personal story is something very similar. I was a drug addict for a long time, and I was delivered, like, not quite an exorcism, but something similar, where I had people praying over me for deliverance. Because I mean, it's funny, I was addicted to weed. People say you can't be addicted to weed. I'm like, well, how many houses have you broken into to get high? Because I've done a couple. And so I knew I was addicted, and as people were praying for me, I had this long, like, really, I wouldn't even call it circuitous, very dark and harrowing journey up till that deliverance. And I heard voices telling me, like, we're stronger than your God. He can't save you from this addiction. And I've been sober now for 10 years, like, just like that day. And I was delivered. The next day, I'm literally doing the exorcist thing where just puking all over the place, like, just green, nasty stuff. I was like, what the heck is this? And, my story, especially as it relates to business, is like, I was trying to become a freelance copywriter for a long time while I remained high. And I just never was able to really get my shit together and make it work. I get sober, and then, like, within a month, I have my first client. And then after that, I've got my next client. And, like, things just started piecing together. And I realized that there was an enemy that was trying to prevent me from living out the purpose that God had for me. And as long as I believed the lies of the enemy, and that was my lot in life, and this is going to be how I lived, then that's who I would have been. And God had such a big and better story for me. And here we are now, with hopefully this message going out to millions of people, like, shedding light on the nature of spiritual warfare, shedding light on the truth of God and why it's so important to live in submission to him, and also letting people know, like, we are created with purpose. And us as business owners, like, we explicitly believe in our business, our job is to go to war against this evil. And so we're not going to be afraid to preach. This is preaching at this point, to preach a message of good news for salvation and for hope and all of these things, and for us to bring on people like yourself who have testimonies. Like, that's kind of the cool thing here, is like, you have a testimony. You didn't really have one before until you became alive in Christ, and now he is moving and working through you. And there are other people who are going to hear this, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is why I'm in this trial right now, because God is building my faith. And they can't understand that circumstance. And, like, even another point to this is, like I mentioned earlier, my dad's an integrated physician. They remained open during lockdowns in North Carolina. They were the ones doing protocols they weren't supposed to do. My dad ended up getting COVID, and it almost killed him. And I mean, he threw everything at it that he possibly had. I remember it was about 3 years ago now. And, like, my mom's like, he's in the hospital. He's in the ICU now. They're not going to put him on a respirator, but my mom was just freaking out. My dad was freaking out. He's like, I can't believe this is where I'm at. Like, I'm the integrated physician guy that has not lost a single patient, and I'm on the verge of death. And I was like, well, that's spiritual warfare too. Like, because here he is following God's call on his life, and the enemy's trying to take him out so that he can't be an effective tool for the kingdom. So it's just it's so cool to hear like your story and how you now have faith, and how other people can listen to that and understand like, oh, my present trials and circumstances may be difficult, but they serve a purpose, and that purpose can and hopefully should be to like draw closer to God, because he is everything. Like, if you made $1 million tomorrow and you didn't have God, then that's a really difficult place to be, because that $1 million is never going to give you the fulfillment and the peace and satisfaction and the identity that you need, but Christ will.
Well, first of all, thanks for sharing that. I think like even if you break it down to like something that's even like impacting people today, is like, how are guys getting taken out at the age between 35 and 55 and 60? They seem happy on the outside. They don't complain to anybody. And the next thing you know, they kill themselves.
Yeah.
Like, that's a real epidemic going on, right?
Yeah.
And so I have no other, people say, oh, like listen to this. Like, I studied NLP and hypnosis for years. Like, oh, they just have demons they couldn't get rid of. Well, what do you mean demons they couldn't get rid of? Like that's a therapist saying that? Well, listen to the language pattern, right? I was explaining to somebody who lives 3 doors down from us, who I love to death, great family. And when I was bringing up like the idea of like, listen to Victor Mark's thing, spiritual warfare, angels versus like there's actual demons. And I said, listen, there's one prayer we say as Catholics ritualistically. What is it? Our Father, right? Well, where'd that come from, right? What's the last 2 sentences in the Our Father? Deliver us from evil. Why doesn't anyone talk about that and explain that? And so they do. They just, it's not common, especially where I'm from, right? And so, so Adam, I think you're just dead on with that. Like, I think it was Victor Marx that said, like, anytime you hear a voice that says like, you can't do that, or you this, it's like, that doesn't come from God. That's an attack. And so, I don't know, man. I think, I'm still in my infancy on this, so I don't want to start like rambling off on things. So we could talk about.
No, actually, this is great. You can pontificate all you want, because that's what this is for.
Well, I think that 2 things I say to people, especially if they're new to like with Christianity and healing and miracles, like, people will look at us like, oh, that's so great for you. And I'm like, well, no, it's great for all of us. Like you don't need Brother Harry to pray over you to do that, right? And so what I always try to say to people is like, look, man, you just ask God, just ask Jesus to show up. Say, hey, Jesus, come reveal yourself to me. Show me how you're working in my life. Like don't let me be the a person. Like, let me just inspire you to ask that prayer, because he will show up. And ask the Holy Spirit to come guide you and be around you. And then the other thing I want to share, you guys wanted something cool. I never really read the Bible, right? And I don't know how I got onto this thing, but like, business was struggling during this time. There's nothing worse than a sick kid and business struggling, and you liked your wife a lot, so you had 7 kids. There's 1 million kids, and there's a lot of responsibilities. But I don't know what chapter it is, but it's the story of Moses and the Red Sea. And so I was reading this like story. I should have had this out for you, but I think I have it off the top of my head pretty good. But like, Moses was crying out to God, like, God, they're coming after us. They're going to kill us, is pretty much what he was saying. And God said to him, like, dude, why are you crying out to me? Like, quit crying. I already told you like what you're capable of. Pick up the stick and do what you're supposed to do. And Moses picked up his rod, and then he shouted out to the Red Sea to part. And the Red Sea started to part. Now, here's what's cool, guys. You're talking about spiritual warfare. Growing up, you're always taught this story of like the Red Sea parts, right? And then they walk through, and then the bad guys come, and then the water kills them all, right? But then there's a chapter in there right before that. It says, the angel that was in front of Moses and the people changed position and moved behind him and created a dark cloud so that could not see them.
Yeah.
And here's what I thought was pretty cool about that. There's nothing said there about Moses asking the angel to move. Because he would have he said, okay, Red Sea part, angel move. The angel knew it, even though they do say like you can call upon your angels and give it instructions. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. That's so cool. I mean, we could actually call out and make commandments. Well, yes, if the Bible's true, then that means you can, if you do it in his name, and it has obviously the right proper fruit behind it. And I was just like, gosh. So I started this prayer like, my God, I need a Red Sea moment. And I just started saying, I know you know how to open doors and you know how to like make the rain come, but I've been trying to plant the seeds here, so I just need you to come along. And I swear to you guys, like the doors are opening, people are showing up out of the blue. Like you guys have showed up out of the blue, you're doing this, but like everything's showing up. I mean, it's amazing. And so, my wife and I, when things get hectic, it's like, well, let's just give it over. Let's just keep giving it over. And my mom said that, by the way. She raised 13 kids. And she would say, we just give it up. We just give it up. And so she was saying the same thing, It's like, how do you make day to day? Well, when your husband's on a fixed income as an electrician and you got 13 kids going to Catholic schools and you got to provide food. Well, we just they always did, you never felt like we didn't have enough. So
at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about, the way that you have raised, your family, we talked about the importance of family and how the family is under attack. What are you doing different now? Like, because I would argue that you did a great job of championing and leading your family prior to that. But what's changed? Now that your heart, your soul, your spirit's been changed. You have this new things to look at life through.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you some really specific ones that are small ones that I've just seen radical shift. Okay. Number one, when I was at Jeff's church, first of all, Jeff's church is a church where they have awesome music. You worship for 25 minutes before they get into that. Jeff is a super down-to-earth, amazing guy, tells great stories, great scripture, and everyone I've met from there are just loving, amazing people. There's zero judgment in the space. And when you're raising the hands up, the music's great. And I just remember like a moment with both my girls, like when they're like, I think Zach from Jeff's church was like, hey, as we're singing here, if you want to come up and kneel for this next song, blah, blah, blah. And I look at my daughters and I'm like, I didn't drive 11 hours to sit in the back row. So I went up there, and here's what was powerful. They came right with me as if it was just normal. And I was thinking in my head, I'm like, I could have been doing this the last 18 years with my kids, and they would have just followed Dad's lead. And so then we're on our knees, never done this before, in front of the altar, eyes closed, hands above the head, praising Jesus, ask him to come to us, praying over people, praying with people. And then we came home. The thing that's probably on our Alexa 90% of the time is Maverick City music or different Christian music. The text messages and DMs back to each other Keegan's been a great leader of this as well, like just because, and Julia's been amazing. So those are just like the things. And then the other night, like I know this is so small. This is really small. So just so your listeners know, I know this is small, but this is also really big for me because we never did this. Is we're out at a restaurant about to have dinner, and I just, we say, let's pray. Something so simple. But it was always easy for me to do that when I'm in the company of somebody who's more Christian than I am, and they're leading the prayer, and I'm just kind of following along. Well, no. This is my tribe, and I'm setting a precedent that I'm trying to get down generationally. And it really hit me and struck me that my 9-year-olds are going to grow up being like, oh, we pray before we eat. Or, oh, wow, this is just what we do. Whereas in my household, we did that, like on Christmas, Thanksgiving, but it wasn't something we did all the time. Two more quick small things is I guess I came back with a little bit more boldness that if you're telling me what you're struggling with, John Eldridge talks about this, but like Jeff does this all the time. He's the best at it, which is like, all right, can I pray for you right now? Great. And then just pray for people that God gave you the authority that if you, through his name, the same authority he gave the disciples, that you can watch the movie The Chosen, he gave to you if you gave your life to him, right? And that you're not, that I am not the one doing the healing, converting, or whatever, but we're calling upon his name to make an intervention into your life. And once you get that, there's no pressure on me because all I got to do is lead with boldness and faith and let the Holy Spirit and let Jesus do the work and get out of the way. But to selfishly hold that to myself would prevent somebody that's walking. Maybe they were praying before they even got into your space. So that's that. And then the daily prayer is really important because the daily prayer takes you through, as a father, takes you through, like John Eldridge's Wild at Heart app takes you through, like, he's got backing for the entire daily prayer, but I go through every one of my kids' names and my wife. We bind, rebuke, and cancel all curses towards my family, whether it's demonic, whether it's whatever. We call upon our angels. We thank the Holy Spirit. We worship Jesus, and I do that all over my kids. So if that's true that I have authority over them to pray for them, then they're being prayed for every single day and being protected. And the angels and Holy Spirit are walking with them daily. So do I believe God has grace and extra fruits for those who believe in him? I do. And so I'm going
it's
all
no
in
small
on it,
thing to
you know?
be praying like that. I mean, like in business fundamentals, right? Like you wouldn't take a step forward in a new business endeavor and just forget the simple things, because that's what you do. You're like, okay, if I'm going to launch a new product, and I know that you and Nate have history in the health space, you're like, okay, I'm going to go do the necessary market research. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. To neglect it would be, I mean, it's a small thing to launch, but to neglect it would be fatal for a potential like successful product launch. And like, now that you're incorporating that into your life, like it's one of those things where it sets you up for success every single day. And that success doesn't necessarily mean that like, oh, today I'm going to kill it in all of these different areas. No, the success is that you are mindful that God is real and that he loves you and that his mercy and grace are never ending. And then you can just walk through any situation and be like, man, like that's all I need. All I ever needed was God, and I have that, and I am now aware of that because like I have this rhythm in my life of just clinging to the truth. And I think, one thing that I was also thinking about when you're talking about like praying stuff in his name, it says in John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word spoke forth existence. So it's the same power that spoke the universe into existence that you are. It's not like you're channeling, because the Holy Spirit's alive inside of you, and he is God, and he is the same as Jesus, which I know Trinity is a totally different thing, but it's like, yeah, it actually works because it's the same word that spoke everything into existence. So he can do anything, and you just have to be a willing vessel to show his love to others, which is literally the second commandment that Jesus has for us. It's just all cool how it works together, and like as long as you have eyes to see and ears to hear.
So with your family, like as you've started to lead in this, this more intentional way, especially on this spiritual front, like what how's that manifested? What are some of the reactions that you've seen, like in the response?
I would say a couple of things, and then like I feel inadequate even sharing this, just because I'm not. I don't think I'm like having a moment where I'm like I don't really. I know there's better models than me. Let me just put it that way. Just throwing that out there. Which my buddy Vinny said, well, like if you're bragging about your new excitement for Jesus,
Amen.
It's a worthy brag.
Absolutely.
I would say that praying for them and over them is now normal. They are aware of that. It's okay. It's what Dad does. And so right now Jeff has me going through like different recordings from Brother Harry, and I'm learning the fruits of the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. I'm sorry, there were 9 gifts of the Holy Spirit. Like no one ever taught me this. Like what? So I'm trying to just improve that. And so instead of like listening to podcasts, random podcasts all the time, I'm spending more time doing stuff like that. And so if you see me walking my dogs, I'm usually praying, and the most miraculous things just keep happening. I can't explain it. And so I'm just kind of doing that. What I would say to people though is like, if you're struggling, just ask for him to show up. Period. End of discussion. On the kid front, though, man, I think let's keep to the basics, right? So we got the Christian side of it. We're praying over them, whatever. And I think, Nate, as you probably were going to as well, I mean, We still struggle with the same thing all parents do. I think it's different though. I think there's a definite more intention in our household. But our kids know they're loved, and we, we expect them to go out there and do their best. And when you're raising kids, I'll just shift that way a little bit. Is like, you got 7 kids. I would just tell parents, like, don't beat yourself up. Just if you have the intention of doing good and you're working at it and you're out there, keep fighting the good fight there for sure. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know, like, because I think one of the things. So again, there's definitely an attack on the family, whether someone wants to acknowledge it or not. Like, I think if you really look closely enough to what's going on in our country and the direction things are going, it was built around the family. And as things continue to decay, like, that's where things are. I don't know. You just look at what's happening. Specifically, like, parents are just outgunned. Like, in most homes now, both parents, or not to say most, but a lot of homes, both parents are working.
Both parents are working. Yeah.
And like they're trying to figure out, like, all right, how are they loving their kids well? How are they taking care of them? Like, and also entertaining them, like, and so they have the time and the space to do the things that they're trying to do, just so that they keep the roof, keep the lights on. I mean, that's a real thing. They're, and I look at how, like, with you, like, and I've seen how intentional you are with, like, coaching with your kids and training your kids, and, like, staying involved in their lives in that way. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like, I guess what is your process for that? Like, when you're thinking about, like, how you engage with your kids, like, because I do believe, like, a lot of what, like, so if I was, like, comparing our lives, like, or like, at least how I compare myself to you when I look at that, like, because I've struggled trying to. So my 18-year-old was on the swim team. She was a great athlete. She just got really burned out on swimming. Now she's working, but, like, I've tried to find ways of keeping them engaged in things that I know that are important for them to be just happy, successful people in general. Something that they're working towards keeps them healthy, like, keeps their mind sharp, things like that. Like, just what is your thought process as, like, you navigate trying to, father 7 kids and keep them, and keeping them where they're just, maybe they're not on, like, their iPads or their iPhones, like, all day, just consuming content.
Well, I think we're all battling that one, right? So that's number one. I mean, number two is, I think a lot of parents complain about, like, the overscheduled child, but I think we're in a day and age where, like, if you don't have your kid, like, if you don't have a plan, there's so much content coming at them. There's so many distractions that you kind of do got to plan a little more. Like, it's not, I get excited about the weekends. We have a very scheduled weekend because most kids they're all, like, I have 7 kids, and, at any given point, there's 4 or 5 of them in sports activities. So, like, our weekends are pretty booked. I've coached, I'm 48 now. I've coached since I was 18, right? So, I knew even right out of high school, I wanted to coach. And then when I played collegiately, I coached. And so I really dove into that. So I would say a couple of things. Number one is that, we've screwed up on our first 3. I'm totally kidding. No, but when you have 7, you have a lot of experimental base. And one of the first things I would share is that I can tell you very, very, very confidently that every kid is different. I think that was probably one of the most, probably biggest breakthroughs, or, like, biggest, like, wow, I have 2 kids and they're just different. Like, the first 2 kids are just different. Like, I thought they'd be more like my wife and I, and they just have their own unique personalities, and I thought they'd all be, like, into sports, like Nolan and myself, and there's a couple that are moderately into it, and there's some that are super into it, right? And so how do I love them where they're at? And I think that's the most important part. I think those are some big foundational important aspects, right? I grew up around a lot of alcohol. Like, I mean, drinking young was normal. Sports kept me out of, like, going too far into that. But, like, my wife and I like a glass of wine, but I think we're very present, and that's not a big part of our life. Like, we have to get up early and we got stuff to do because we have goals and we're trying to do things. And so I've been really happy to see, like, but I don't know if that's always, I think there's always exceptions to every rule. So I hate saying that.
For sure.
And
with 7 kids, you guys have less margin for for waking up and not having your A game?
Yeah, like I think especially as we get older, like, and it's less important. Like, kind of going back to our last topic we were talking about, like just kind of the new path I'm on. Like, it's just I got things to do. You know, like we got things to do, people. Like, there's yeah. So a couple things that I'm very aware of that we just shame and guilt are not really allowed in my household, because there's no really uses for either one of them, right? Like. Like if someone gets in trouble, cool. What's the reprimand? What's the thing? Da 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 da. But I'm not going to keep shaming you. Like that's old school stupidity that really sends people away from you, and I think leads to a lot of things. Okay, a lot of bad things. The household should be a safe place. The man of the household needs to be present. Needs to understand his role in the household. Needs to fight for his marriage. If the marriage is no longer there, that's okay. Now we got to fight for, you still have the power to pray over your kids, and you still have the power to create a safe environment.
So real quick. So step number 1, like making sure like you're leading yourself well. Step number 2, like making sure you're attending well and loving your wife well and taking care of the marriage. And then from there,
even when it's super hard. Yep. Yep. Now, there's a lot of men probably listening to this that's already a foregone thing. So I have no judgment on that. Like it just is, you're at where you're at. And so how do we like go forward? But you still have authority over your children, you know, from a spiritual side. And kids are at different phases. So like I know there's guys that maybe we screwed up 10 years ago, and you have like what's called a broken home right now. Stick with it, man. You know, I mean, there's a great, I think it's the same song, like hearts could be restored and prodigals return. You know, you know, pray for your children if you're trying to get them back, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what else to say, Nate. I mean, like, is there anything more specific on that? I think.
Well, so when I was breaking it down, so it's like, all right, 1, first yourself. 2, you know, if the marriage is still an active part of the home marriage, then your kids. So like as you're thinking about, so with your kids, it's it's a different approach for each child.
Well, I think with the kids, though, the kids, like, you know, like it goes back to business. Like Dan Sullivan talked about it with the unique ability. Like you're trying to find what is that kid's unique thing that is special to them, that lights them up, that gets them fired up. And then
how do you go about that? Like,
well, you know, it's different for each one. I mean, like my son who got into golf, like my wife got him a lesson in golf. I was totally against it. I thought it was a waste of time. I did.
Really?
I was like, this is, oh yeah, he was already in like 4 sports. I'm like, why are we doing golf? That's the stupidest. And I probably said, that's the stupidest thing we could ever be doing. He's already in baseball. He's already in freaking volleyball. He wants to do lacrosse. You're going to go golfing? Golfing's not, we're the O'Keefes. Like we're the blue collar like Southsiders who are fine. We don't golf. Like no one golfs, you know, and I totally did not. Now I love golf. But he demonstrated it because at 10:30 at night, he's in the backyard hitting balls into a net. And then, you know, and with some people came along, we're like, Ed, you gotta get him in with Coach Mark. And so we sat him down. Said, Mom, Dad are looking to, so you want to go do this? Okay, cool. Well, you're going to get a coach. We're hiring a pro. You're going to go through the 8-week program. It's not cheap. So if we're going to do this investment, man, this means you're in. You're getting after it. And so he was like, I'm all in. And then we had a conflict, right? The conflict was, well, baseball and golf is, because, you know, baseball's so stupid, they make you sign up in July for the next spring. It's just, club sports has gotten crazy with that, by the way. Like they're trying to not let people recruit from each other's clubs, so they're making you sign up 9 months before the season begins. So much changes in between those times. But anyhow, so we had a defining moment, which was like, well, what are you gonna do? Is it gonna be, you know, baseball or golf? And he's like, well, can I just go be on the B team for the club team? And I was like, no, we don't do that. We don't go backwards on that. Like you're gonna become good at, you know. I'm like, here's the deal. It's Sunday morning, 7 a.m. You have a golf bag and you have a baseball bag. weather's gorgeous outside. What are you picking up to go do? And he said, my golf bag. I'm like, then that's what you're doing. We'll eat the money that we spent towards baseball, and then we're just moving forward. But so each kid's different than that, right? Other kids bounce in and out of things. I remember when my daughter Grace, and everyone knows I played volleyball in college, pretty darn good coach in that. I remember my daughter coming out after dealing with injuries and whatever, came out of a lesson, looks at me, and she's like, can I just do lacrosse? And lacrosse, she really never played. It would be for fun. What she was really telling me, she didn't want to play club volleyball anymore. And she didn't want to do the season. And I was like, yeah, that's good. We're good. Totally get it. Know where you're at.
So, so when do you, I mean, like, when's this, like, is there any situation where, like, you won't let one of your kids, like, quit something?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's different situations. So like with Grace and that, where I was like, yeah, no problem. It's because the season had like 3 weeks, 4 weeks before the season was tryouts were even going to start. So we had time to notify the club saying she's not going to be on a roster. No one was harmed. There are probably people,
so there wasn't like a commitment there that had been made.
Yeah, she wasn't mid-season. She wasn't mid-season. And the answer to that's yes. But there's also situations where I take a different tact as well. Like if a coach is bad and they're not good for the kids, and I think that's detrimental, I'll take exception on that one. There's times where I remember just absolutely hating football when I was in like 6th grade, just hating it, 5th grade. Frankly, and then my parents said, you got to finish the year. And I was like, okay, whatever. But it was such a waste of time. I guess I did finish it, but my God, it was awful. So I'm trying to think through that one a little bit. Like, will there be times where I'll let them quit? I don't know, man. I mean, I think I can't really remember one where I have let them just opt out. I'm just trying to think through that. So, I mean, I think Noel and I are pretty good at like kind of looking forward and being like, look, but man, I'll tell you, like if a kid's mental health is like, because I've coached for a long time, so I'm running through a lot of files right here. Where like if a kid's depressed or kid's battling some anxiety that's outside of the sport, but the sport's making it worse, I think taking a break's important. And work, let's work it out. Let's figure it out. How can we support you at that moment? No question. And I've been on the coaching side of that. Not really been. I actually have been on the parenting side of that. And so I've seen both sides of that. So there's definitely. Yeah. I think on the mental health side, or like where that, I think you gotta have some space there to have flexibility in decisions.
Yeah, we had one situation years ago where. So my oldest at the time was in competitive cheerleading, and the coach was a terrible human being. Like, so much so that, like, I would sit up there in the top deck and be like, I actually want to grab this guy by the hair and drag him out in the parking lot, and I want to whip his ass.
Yeah.
But
where were you at exactly?
Where were you at? Austin, Texas. So it was, it was.
Were you at one of your kids' games?
This was at my daughter's cheerleading practice. Like the culture, I can only speak to the cheer culture that I've seen. The one that I witnessed was pretty dang toxic. But as she was, so when it first started happening, because I also had I was an extremely ADHD kid. So a lot of my coaches early in my life had a hard time knowing what to do with me, because I would perform great on the field, but then when they were coaching, like I would be pretending to shoot down planes, like with my pretend bazooka, and it just would piss them off. So like I had a lot of coaches that had very negative reactions to that, to the degree of like, not being selected for an all-star team, things like that. And it affected me very negatively as I grew older, where I started having issues with authority, and I was taking that information. And when Avery started having these challenges with his coach, like, I was like, all right, because she was like, I want to quit. Let's not quit yet. Like, let's because my attack with her was like, you're going to deal with terrible people your entire life. Like, you're going to deal with people that make things hard on you. Like, they're not effective at coaching. It could be a teacher, it could be a boss, it could be any of these things. And and in that situation, the entire 30-minute car ride there was always a coaching session on like, when your coach does this or when this does this has nothing to do with you. And like, so basically just gave her mental tools on how to deal with that particular situation. And I was actually pretty surprised. Like she actually, I started talking to her and asking her, like, leaving practice, like, oh, how was practice? And she would start regurgitating to me the things that that her and I were talking about. And then I even started watching her on the floor when the coach would single a girl out and like kind of basically berate them for whatever the thing was. Like, and sometimes it might have been justified. Other times the way that he did it, the style was very degrading. I would watch her actually to start coaching, sharing things that she was thinking to those girls, like, hey, that has nothing to do with you. He's just having a bad day, or like, something happened and so we actually left her in cheer that time. But then later we ended up, like, the swimming thing I was talking about, like we ended up letting her quit swimming because the mental health thing actually was to such a degree that I was like, I don't see how this is only going to make this whole situation worse. And so we let her exit out of that one. So it was two different situations, but as we were talking about that was, I was thinking back to that experience that we had in those two different situations. But I don't know, it was interesting.
Yeah. I was, I don't know, man. Like, I'll tell you, like, the most influential people in your life are your parents, your teachers, and your coaches, right? And so when the kids are young, if they're around really like negative coaches who are it's about them, and like they want to like be bullies to young kids. I mean, I also think that it's very bad. And I also think that, like, especially with the bullying thing. So like if you have like a grown man, like, berating freaking 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, like,
yeah,
are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So I in some ways I don't necessarily consider, I'd have to like take that on a case by case thing, but I would say that if would I send my kid out to you right now if I know you're gonna MF him and shame him and guilt him like that? Mm-hmm. We don't do that shit in my household.
Yeah.
And
that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, right. So like, okay, we committed to your 3-month little freaking cheerleading thing, right? Yeah, but you're kind of a joke, dude. Like you're not running a positive, like, the whole purpose you put kids into things is not to help. If I want to go get my ass beat down, I go to Kokoro camp or like, some of these, like I don't, my self-esteem is
I showed up for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I showed up for that. Well, I know I'm going to get forced because I did a post just recently, like, because I'll be coaching volleyball here in an hour and a half with 12-year-old girls. We had a Wednesday practice, and my wife was running the drill. I was a little late, so I was dropping the other kids off. And I stopped the drill, like, after our first water break. And I was like, hey, guys, listen to me. There's no judgment in this room. Like, so when you make a mistake, like, the beat yourself up, the shoulder, like, and I know how to, like, coach 12-year-olds. Like, I'm so bad. Oh, my God, I can't believe I did that. Like that. You leave it outside this gym. Like, in this gym, we want you to make mistakes because we're here to, Coach O'Keefe and I are here to support you, come alongside you. We're going to make you better. And the more judgment you have, the slower we go. Like, you don't have to criticize yourself here. We're good. Now, like, I want my kids around those coaches. Now, will they have the opposite of that times? Yes. But if they're berating and awful, I actually just remembered something. So my daughter was in wrestling, and the head boys coach is known for somebody who is just whatever. He doesn't have a great reputation. And I'm someone who understands learning, and I'm someone who understands basic, like, jiu-jitsu, basic MMA, like, as a hobbyist. And I've done a little bit of training, but nothing to brag about at all. But I do understand sequencing, and I do understand, like if you're brand new to the sport and you don't even know, like, hey, you're about to go have a tournament, what is your number one, what is your takedown? Like, what's your 1 or 2 takedowns we're going for? And then when you shoot for that and they block it, what's your counter to it? Like, the most basic stuff. And if you're like, I don't know. Like, I was able to quickly analyze, like, this guy's setting her up for, like, there's no structure for the girls. There's nothing there for them. They're just kind of off to the side. And then, Nate, you fought MMA. Like, you put somebody who has no structure or a game plan into a tournament, what happens?
Yeah, they're not gonna win.
They just get their ass handed to them, and then there's no thing to it. And so in that situation with one tournament left, she didn't want to be a part of it, and I let her off the hook on that. Now, for people watching this, they're like, "Oh, Ed, you don't understand. You should." It's like, you guys don't understand. Like, there was zero support that would give me any reason why the future was going to be any better. Now, like, would I pull her out and put her in a different training camp and have a totally different experience? Yes, but yeah, I think some of that's case by case. I think as parents, you do your kids much better to, like, it's your responsibility to make sure there's adults not just pounding on kids. And by the way, I've coached girls and I've coached boys. People always say, like, "Oh, I coach boys totally different than girls." And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? "Oh, you can yell at boys a lot more." I'm like, really? Like, I understand that in football and some of the sports because it's just a louder game. It's a little more physical. But boys don't like getting. I think you got a lot of wounded men because they were beaten up as boys. And
John would agree.
boys,
That's that whole Wild at Heart book. All these kids carrying the wound. I was kind of curious because in sports, in coaching, a lot of this is around discipline, and then of course you being a father and having 7 kids, and it doesn't really matter how many kids. Like, discipline is always important. So, like, what is your philosophy around discipline? And I don't mean just in like punitive measures, but just like, how do you, like, and it says it in the Bible, like, like obedience is what, it's not so much that God desires obedience, it's the heart of the matter. So, like, I'm just curious about your philosophy around discipline, because it's something I've been kind of exploring. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And so I'm like, all right, I have to have a philosophy of discipline that I can be in agreement with my wife, and that I can execute, that I know is going to, it's not the result that matters, but more like, is my child understanding why he's disciplined, and then knowing that, like, the direction that we are disciplining him is going to produce fruit in his life.
Yeah, they don't need to know the third part, the last part. They don't really need to know that in the beginning. I always say, like Nola and I had a lot of success with 1, 2, 3 magic when the kids were young. Like, like, you do the 1, 2, and then 3, you stick them in timeout. If they're 3 years old, they go in there for 3 minutes. If they're 6 years old, they're in there for 6 minutes. And if you read, like, I always joke with people, I'm like, just read the introduction to the book. You're gonna know the whole book right there. And the whole idea is like, the more non-emotional you can be, which, by the way, is super hard it's just super hard, But our kids were always pretty darn good, well-behaved. And we'd go places and we'd be like, what the hell's going on over here? And the mom would be like, why are your kids so well-behaved? And by the way, that doesn't mean my kids were perfect. I mean, they found their butts in timeout a lot. And I do think it's your responsibility as parents to find out the structure that you're going to parent by, and stick to that. Like, a lot of times when kids are young, it's Pavlov's dog. Now, I'm not talking about the 10% exception where there's something else going on that's beyond just basic stuff. So I'm not talking about anything outside that. But I'm talking about, like, basic kids that can understand instructions, who just keep messing up. The more they don't have any, like, guidelines. Like, kids do better. I talk about parenting is almost like we're playing bumper bowling. We're just trying to put the bumpers on there so that we're at least moving them in the right direction. And we pray they turn out okay, So that's how I feel about that. Discipline, like, is in the teens and stuff. And I wasn't sure if you're going to go there too on discipline. Or were you just talking about discipline from that perspective?
Yeah, exactly.
As, like, how do we discipline kids?
If they misbehave, if they do things that are contrary to what you and your wife expect in the home, like, how do you exercise discipline?
Yeah, I mean, do Noel and I have differing views on what is bad? Yeah, there's totally like, oh, Dad's the good cop and I'm always the bad cop. Like, she'll tell you that. So I got to get that out of the way in case she ever somehow watches this clip and she's like, you're totally making it sound like you always let them off the hook. So I mean, obviously, like, I think there's a little bit of just, I think most parenting relationships, just one's going to be probably harder on the rules than others. But I do think just kids thrive in structure. And actually, let me take the opposite of it. Without any structure, kids fail completely, right? Which I think that's my point on it earlier when I was saying, like, kids need more structure nowadays than ever before because the world has too much going on. The athletes I coach and I'm around, like, our team finished 3rd in the country last year for our 17s. Like those kids are training 5 days a week, and those kids are committed, and so there's a discipline there. One of the questions I'll ask my kids when they're saying, "Hey, I want to do this sport, or I'm going to do this," like I'll ask them like flat out, like, "How good do you want to get? Like, do you want to get good enough to just be on a high school team? Do you want to be like good enough to start? Do you want to be the best in the area? Do you want to be the best in the state? Do you want to be somebody who goes Division I? Do you want to be like, what do you want to do?" And some of that's just pure genes and see where they'll end up. But then we'll hold them to that. And then we try and build out the structure to help them reach those goals, And then I have other kids that when I ask them, "What's your schedule this week?" they'll be like, "Why are you attacking me? Why are you asking me these questions?" They're like, "Well, first of all, your brother over here, like I know his schedule for the next 4 months because I helped him create it. And I can't even tell you, get you to tell me what you're doing tomorrow. So I'm not attacking you at all. I'm just
That's funny.
Yeah, actually,
being your dad."
part of that question was inspired by what you had said earlier about your role as a father and going back to the faith component, because that's something I read earlier this year. I think it was earlier this year that talked about the role of the father and like the responsibility that we have as fathers, and how if we fail, it's not so much that we just fail our kids, like we fail other people in our community. We fail. I'd probably like end it there, because like if you don't raise good kids, people who are inspired to live in a truthful manner, people who are inspired to be benevolent and all that, then what happens is you have a cascading effect of what we're witnessing right now. I would argue that a lot of the deterioration in society is because parents just kind of absolve themselves of having to responsibly discipline their children, especially like in the 90s and early 2000s when we kind of got away from that. And so that's where I was like, okay, so what does discipline look like for him, especially now that you have this new frame of reference to be like a Christ-following father and leader of the household?
Yeah, I would say now I just have more of a structure on how to do that. Before I always was like, I would always say I'm a Christian, I'm a patriot. I believe in being an American, and we're very lucky to have been born here. I would also, I would also say like my kids are very well aware of my beliefs on different policies and politics. And I think one of the scary things is our kids go off to college. Like I have one in college now, and the absolute insanity that's going on in some of these colleges with these professors that really haven't done anything in their entire freaking lives to be the people that are trying to tell our kids like what values are. And that's going to implode on them too, because you're already seeing it. You're already seeing these ignorant people pop up. Was it Harvard that had like so many people like sign some kind of petition for
it's like
on behalf of
20% or something like that.
Like
it was just ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's just so are you all just a bunch of clueless followers you don't even know what's going on at all? Now, do I want to see any children hurt no matter what? No, I don't at all. But they just are very, very ignorant. I think like what's going to happen there too, Adam, and I'll tell you, Nate, one of my other hobbies, I love reading like Jack Carr books, back in the Jason Bourne days, like all those books, I had Jack on my podcast. Jack's great. If one lone gunman can stop an entire city from functioning up in Maine, what would like 10 bad guys who attack soft targets in the same city, what would happen then?
Yeah.
And we have an open border. We got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of migrants that we don't even know. And then we have like supposedly 85,000 kids that we don't even know where they're at. I mean, if Hamas has been planning this for 2 years and we've had an open border since Biden got into office, it doesn't take somebody with super intelligence to be like, okay, hey, China's getting all this fentanyl through the border. Why don't we just start sending some of our B-level, C-level grunts overseas up through a thing? We got these connections in these different mosques, and when they're ready, it's easy to buy. I can go on. I'm in Chicago. I could probably have an AK within an hour if I had enough money. If I had the money, just walk up to a couple dudes on the other side or make a few phone calls.
Yeah.
This is not hard stuff. Yeah. So I think that's where, like, when you start looking at, like, that concerns me of some of this humanity of, like, oh, America's so bad. Well, sure, there's things that could be better, like, within our society, but all you people, like, protesting against America don't realize you wouldn't even be allowed to live at some of these places you're trying to, protest on behalf for. So I don't know how to interpret some of that stuff. Like, I'm still processing some of that as far as, like, what does that mean for me and, like, our movements as a family. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think that
it's crazy.
Something that's kind of interesting is how so many people complained about the United States, and they've been doing that since Bush was president and we invaded Iraq. And they're like, they call us the Great Satan. Even people here in the United States are calling America that. And I got to be that way in college because I was indoctrinated for a time. I was like, oh my gosh, like, here I am, or with all these liberals and let's just call them leftists, because, like, I'm probably more of a classic liberal than I am anything else. But anyways, like, these leftists and leftist ideology, I started to hate the United States. And I realize now that it's not the United States that I hate, like, especially, or hated. It's the irresponsibility of the general populace, as well as the fact that people who are pulling the levers of power have made this culture where there is no personal responsibility. Big Daddy government's going to take care of you. Just have all fealty to Big Daddy government, the two-party system, and then they're the ones who have created this culture that we now have to kind of wade through. Like, in as we're coming back to principles of, like, the original founding fathers and self-determination, it's like, oh my gosh, like, they had it right in 1776 and before then. And I'm just like, wow, like, I can't believe that we got to this place. And I'm thankful that so many people are coming to realize, hey, we have a problem, and it's systemic, and it's not critical race theory that's going to fix it. It's not more spending that's going to fix it. It's actually a return to principled Western values that were, around in the 16 and 1700s with John Locke and all of these guys that the founders built their original ideas off of. And I'm like, yeah, can we just get back to that? And of course, like, all of that comes from the Great Enlightenment, which comes from Jesus. And it's like, okay, it's all full circle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like we're at a good spot where we could either pivot and go somewhere else, or I know you've got somewhere you need to be, Ed, but I feel like we could probably end up doing this again.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of stuff that we could have really gotten a lot deeper into.
I have a question. Mary Crest, was that near the Putnam Museum? The Putnam?
Yeah, it was over at 1612 West something, right there. So yeah, that's over by I think it was a nursing home. Mr. B's.
Yeah,
was
I'm
the
looking
bar
right
we
now
used to
because
go
it's not. It's a National Historic Marker. Now that it's been out of, I think it went out of business in 2002.
Yeah.
Okay.
Putnam Museum was right
And I'm
behind us. You're right.
thinking-
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Locust.
Yeah, Locust is up a
there?
little bit, but now I know where this school is. I've been by here before. I was just like, Mary Crest, where is that? I don't ever go to that far west, Davenport.
Oh yeah, you're asking about our it's the real deal. Like what they say is going on in the news.
Yeah,
it's going on here in Chicago.
Chirac.
This is not a joke. Yeah, it's crazy.
Dude, the highlight of the
Because you can. Yeah, it's funny.
dude. Well,
It's funny.
I just so stoked to hear that about what happened with Keegan.
Thank you, brother.
That is
awesome.
seriously, like, awesome. Like, I don't.